Hey guys, it's the Enlightened Boomer. Haven't been doing videos. I had sworn off them, haven't done one for 3 months, a good 3 months. And, but Tucker Carlson did a video last night about what he sees as the new American religion, even though there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. He contends that we now have a religion that is tied to the state, and even though we can contradict America policy, say things we don't like about America, this American religion we're not going to be allowed to criticize. And you can see how the groundwork is being laid for that. For any influencer that does criticize this religion is being lumped together as pure evil scum. You should never listen to these people anymore, even though they had they were totally supported by these people before, because they have made their feelings known about what Israel is doing, and you're not supposed to do that because Israel is tied to the new Israel religion, which Tucker calls Israelism. So, I did this video one time before. Now this is it was a 45-minute video. And so I got really annoyed because the sound of me talking didn't come through. Now, but I'm just telling you that for background. Tucker is going to get to a point where he talks about the Holocaust. And on X last night, everybody attacked Tucker for not using the official $6 million figure when referring to the Holocaust. And that figure has been debunked, even though the mainstream media will not recognize that official debunction. If you really press them against the wall, they will admit it looks like only 2 million died. Now, there are people that I respect that come up with a different figure because they're not buying the oven claims. There's no evidence that Jews were killed in ovens. Only people that survived the camps are here to tell us their tale, and they never saw an oven in action. For some reason they think there were ovens, but there's no physical evidence of ovens other than very minor uses, because it's scientifically, physically impossible to burn 6 million Jews in ovens. It's impossible. Can't even come close to that figure. If they did it 24 hours a day, because it's a slow process to cremate a body. And that's why it's scientifically impossible if you do the math. But it doesn't seem to matter, because the Israel religion needs a $6 million figure for some kind of Kabbalistic reason, of which I'm not expert enough to go into. But enough of me. I'm going to let Tucker talk. It'll be about a 30-minute talk. It's an important talk, and I just cut to the chase on what he's talking about, this new religion. His actual video is much longer, so that's why I'm just cutting out this specific portion, which I think is relevant to the thing I want to emphasize, that they've got a new religion in America, and we're not in it, but we're not supposed to criticize it. And we are America firsters. We need to come together, left and right, who are America firster, that think it's a right to criticize Israel if they think they're doing wrong. And it shouldn't be blasphemy to do so. And we should come together on an America First party. I've advocated that in some of my recent posts. I don't get a lot of viewership for some reason. It seems that everybody on X looks at how many followers you have. And if you don't have enough followers, you don't deserve a reply or a look. It seems that way, because the only replies I get are from comments I make in other people's posts. Doesn't matter how the quality of the post, and this has never been true for me until I joined X as a 76-year-old old person, quote unquote. So there you have it, folks. On to Tucker Carlson.
That because Catholics, sincere church-going Catholics, vote Republican. In fact, the more often you go to Mass, the more likely you are to vote Republican. And that's true across races, by the way. So you see all these, Hispanics are voting for Trump. And he got more Hispanics to vote for him, it is true, in 2024 than any Republican maybe ever. More than Jeb Bush, speaking Spanish, married to a Mexican lady. Well, how did he do that? Well, one of the reasons he did that is because a lot of Hispanics are very Catholic. They're Christian. They're religious. They go to Mass a lot. And because they do, because their faith, for some of them, their faith is at the center of their lives, they voted for the candidate who seemed most predisposed to their religious views. Maybe he's not a Christian or a fervent Christian, but he seemed like a man who would protect Christians, Catholic Christians included, and so they voted for him. So a year ago, and every Republican knows this because there's lots of polling on it, because politicians think in terms of coalitions and who's going to vote for me and why, and they know this very well. So a year ago, no Republican would ever get up on TV and say, the thing about Catholics is they're kind of Nazis. But there's Lindsey Graham doing it right there. This is a profound break, and it's a very clear window into what the actual faith is. Israel is the deal killer. Anyone who doesn't support the military aims of the modern Israeli government cannot be part of the MAGA coalition, and, Lindsey Graham has just told us, can't be a Christian. It's amazing. But it's not just Lindsey Graham. This is everywhere today, in case you haven't seen it. Here's Patrick Bet-David on his podcast a day or two ago. Watch this.
I don't know why Catholics, have this issue with Jews. I don't know what it is. They have this, I don't, listen, I get the Jews have issues with Christians, and they'll make fun, and they'll say stuff like, your Jesus is going to do, they'll say, well, he was a Jew anyways, right? Yeah. But then Catholics have that issue with Jews. And they act like, they're all innocent and everything. And when you look at Catholics, the amount of centralized power they have. Centralized. If you know what the total Catholic population is worldwide? It's like 1.213 billion. Jews are 15 million. 15 million. But Jews are decentralized. Meaning, Jews don't have somebody they listen to that says, hey, you better do this. Catholics, God forbid you say something about the Pope. They're like, hey man, listen, who is that Pope figure in the Christian community? We don't have one. No. If I ask you right now who's the Pope in the Christian community, you don't have somebody to look at. Who is it? Which pastor? Yeah, exactly. No, we don't have one. It's a non-determined Bible. If you look at only Catholics and Muslims have somebody that they look at as their supreme leader, like, you got to go to somebody. But even more, it's Catholic.
Well, there's only two theocracies in the world.
Catholicism?
Islam. I'm sorry, the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yep.
And the Vatican.
Yeah.
Those are the two major theocracies.
So actually, the Vatican is very much like the Nazi Iranian government, the theocratic government, the mullahs. It's all basically the same. They've got the complicated dress. They hate the Jews, as Patrick Bet-David just said. Catholics have a problem with the Jews. A problem with the Jews. It's slander. It's an attack on the world's largest and oldest Christian denomination, and it's taking place openly. And it's all coming from the same source, which is Israel. The issue is Israel. Anyone who supports the Netanyahu government, not Israel as a concept, not all Jews, no, the Netanyahu government, anyone who ratifies every decision, no matter how violent or grotesque or genocidal of the Netanyahu government, those are the good people, and anyone who doesn't is a Nazi, and by the way, their religion itself is a Nazi religion. It's an inherently anti-Semitic religion. That's what they're telling you, out in the open. And the kind of casual dismissal, the mockery, the loathing of the oldest and largest Christian church is just remarkable. Now again, Trump is someone who, has a lot of problems showing respect to other powerful figures. And it's not just Trump. Most men like Trump are that way. They get along well with women because they're not threatened by women. Woman's probably not trying to kill you and become king. They're kind of loyal, but other men, every other man to a certain male personality type is a potential threat. That's why kings kill their sons. Every man is a potential threat. And so Trump is not, on a gut level, instinctively respectful of anything or anybody. And that's one of the reasons he was a much-needed, transformative political figure for so long in the United States, because he was willing to ask questions that most people in Washington had never even thought of out of deference to the existing system. Why do we have NATO? Is it really good idea? Offshore manufacturing? Is our immigration actually, our system helping the United States or hurting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All famously the questions that Trump asked, but the way we were doing things were made possible. He was able to ask those things because he doesn't have reflective respect for anybody. Got it. And so when Trump mocks Jesus and the Pope and Christians and tweets out the F word on Easter morning, kind of like, well, this is awful, but it's also kind of consistent with the Trump we know. This is just Trump turned up to 11. But what's interesting is there are certain circumstances where Trump shows sincere reverence. There are the outlines of an actual religious faith here. And they're not what you would expect. So here, for example, is Donald Trump, the month before the last election, this is October 2024, visiting the grave of a man called Rebbe Schneerson, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who he's since passed away, the leader of a large Orthodox sect. He's Eastern European by birth, came with many of his followers to New York, to Brooklyn, and built a very successful, though relatively speaking, very small center of religious thought and political power, actually. He died some years ago. There's the now president standing there. It looks like maybe Ben Shapiro there, Howard Lutnick, wearing a kippah on his head. As you look at that, ask, is it possible to imagine Donald Trump ever mocking Rebbe Schneerson, who, by the way, and this is kind of the point, is considered by some of his followers to be the Messiah. And to be completely clear, every American is allowed to decide for himself who the Messiah is, so that is not mockery of that belief. I don't personally believe it, but one of the reasons we've been able to live with people of different faiths in this country for 250 years is we don't mock other people's religious faith unless you're absolutely forced to, unless you're trying to make me attend your religious rituals or bow down before a God I don't consider God. Unless it comes to that, we kind of let each other have our own religious views. And that has worked. That's changing very, very fast, however. But ask yourself, can you imagine Donald Trump sending out a meme mocking Rebbe Schneerson? And of course, under no circumstances could you imagine that, because under no circumstances would that ever happen. Trump would not be allowed to do that, and Trump would never even consider doing it. But sending out multiple images mocking Jesus? No problem at all. So that gives you a more precise sense of what our civic religion actually is. A civic religion, by the way, is not a conventional religion. Civic religion is a series of customs, some enshrined in law, not all, that a society, civilization, and its government observe. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's a God at the center of it. That's why it's a civic religion rather than a conventional religion. But our civic religion is, if you, again, take 3 steps back and just assess the country with the eyes of a visitor, a modern Tocqueville, you can see it really clearly. What are the events? Who are the people who we treat with reverence? What are you actually not allowed to make fun of? What is blasphemy in modern America? Those are the questions you ask if you are trying to understand what our operative religion is. What's the religion of our leaders? And again, it's not a conventional religion necessarily. It's not Torah Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism or evangelical Christianity or Catholic Christianity. It's the actual religion, the real religion. The set of beliefs that we treat with reverence. Well, it just so happens there was a religious ceremony ongoing today in the United States Capitol, complete with very recognizable religious iconography, symbolism. You may not even have known this was happening, but it was happening today as part of an 8-day celebration of remembrance of the Holocaust, the period in the 1930s and 40s where the German government, the Nazi government, murdered, in addition to a lot of other people, a whole bunch of Jews. And that ended in part because the United States sent troops to Europe, millions of troops to Europe, to defeat the German government. And with the help of the Soviets, our allies at the time, we did that. And in the process of doing that, over 250,000 Americans, American men, were killed trying to stop the Nazi government from doing the evil things that it was doing. 250,000, more than, American men died fighting the Nazis. But in today's ceremony in the Congress, there was no mention of them. There was instead this. Watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, a museum leadership program has included more than 72,000 U.S. military members. Through examination of the Holocaust, they gain insight into their own professional and individual responsibilities. The candlelighters are members of the United States Army 3rd Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard.
Ein solchen Eid allen. I remember.
That is a current uniformed U.S. military member from the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment, which is ever present at our public events in Washington, lighting a candle at the menorah and saying, I remember. No explanation of, I remember. Remember what? What are we remembering here? And we do have a sense that we're not remembering the American soldiers who liberated Dachau, for example. We're not remembering the 250,000 American men who joined a war they had nothing to do with inherently. It wasn't taking place in North America, it was taking place in Europe. And the dispute was over Poland and Czechoslovakia. And they sacrificed their lives to defeat the Nazi government that was murdering Jews and a lot of other people, Poles and Russians and Gypsies and Czechs and lots of people, a lot of Jews as well. But they gave their lives to stop that, but we're not remembering them. We're remembering only the victims of one specific ethnicity during these 8 days of remembrance, as distinct from the Day of Remembrance that we also have, that's also enshrined in American law, in January. So there's a total of 9 days of remembrance of one group of victims in a war that killed tens of millions of people globally, tens and tens and tens of millions. The numbers are actually not even clear. So many people died. We're not exactly sure how many died, but many tens of millions died, including close to 500,000 Americans, over 250,000 in Europe fighting this Nazi regime, not remembered. So that is not to disrespect the Jewish victims of the Holocaust or the Second World War, of course not. Merely to note that in this country, only one group gets to be remembered, and remembered with grave solemnity by uniformed members of our military who take no credit for ending this Holocaust. So it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you didn't know the backstory in any of this and someone wrote that down and told you, you'd be like, well, what? And it almost seems like there's a kind of guilt implied in this, which is a little weird. There are countries where, that might be appropriate. This is not one of them, because again, this was the country that helped liberate people from those camps and fought the government that built those camps. We're the good guys. What is this? It doesn't make any sense except when you see it in the only terms in which it makes sense, which is as a civic religion, which is what it is. And it comes complete with blasphemy laws. Once again, if you want to know what religion matters, it's the religion that can't be mocked. So clearly it's not Christianity. I'm Jesus today. No, I didn't do that. Oh, he's your God. Okay, I'll send a meme out with me posing as your God with a demon over my shoulders. Nothing you can do about it. I'm not even going to explain what that was. I don't need to, because I don't care about your faith at all. But there are certain things that are blasphemy. And at the very top of that list is something called anti-Semitism. Now, what exactly is anti-Semitism? It's one of those crimes it's a true crime in the United States, and actual anti-Semitism, hating people because of their blood, is a crime. Certainly, in Christianity, that is a crime. That is wrong. You're not allowed to do that. But that is a universal crime. It applies to all people. Whites, blacks, Asians, Jews, everybody has a right to be treated as an individual because everyone was created by God as an individual. That's the Christian understanding. It's a universalist understanding of rights. And that's the old civic religion we had. The civic religion of civil rights. Then there was a civil rights movement, which was, fraudulent. Maybe at its core, maybe its aims were not advertised honestly. Maybe there was another point to that. Just possible. But conceptually, it's kind of hard to argue with the fact that the assumptions behind civil rights are Christian assumptions. They're Western assumptions. They're the assumptions upon which our whole civilization is built. And the core assumption is that standards, rules, apply to everyone because every human being possesses a soul given to him by God at creation, which is not an act that men brought about, but that only God can bring about. God creates life. He endows each human being with a soul. That soul is eternal. Therefore, each individual possesses rights granted him by God, not government. And a good government protects those rights. And in so doing, upholds God's law. That's Western civilization right there. And in a kind of diluted, silly way, the civil rights movement was upholding those ideas. The term civil rights, the term human rights, reflect that understanding. The rights apply to you because you're a human, as they do all human beings. But that's over. That civic religion has died. And we know that's probably been dying for a long time. Identity politics is a refutation of that. The idea that some groups have more rights than others, that's the opposite of civil rights. That's the opposite of human rights. Those are human rights, those are group rights. They apply to certain groups. One bloodline is superior to another bloodline. Well, that's not what we thought we were for. That's the opposite of what we thought we were for. All of a sudden you wake up and you realize not only are we for it, the government's for it. And that's why they're able to arrest people not who commit genocide, but people who complain about genocide. Some of us thought, stupidly, like the cattle we are, that the real lessons of World War II were every person has inalienable rights. That's what we were taught. That was a pretty common understanding, say, in the 1970s and 80s. Nazis are bad because they redlined one group and said these people don't have the same rights as everyone else by virtue of their blood, but they were really interested in eugenics, and they were interested in people's bloodline. Who are you related to? We're going to find out if you're a secret Jew. Well, that's disgusting. We used to say that's Nazi behavior. And then the next thing you know, every other federal form you get asks you what your race is. And you're thinking, well, why does that matter? I thought you told me it didn't matter. I thought you told me it was evil to care about that. But you wake up in 2026, and our closest ally is using our weapons to kill and displace people because of how they were born. And not only is that okay, the only real crime is complaining about it. Well, that tells you, it tells you a lot of things. But it tells you we've got a whole new set of rules. We have a whole new civic religion. And that civic religion, once again, is called Israelism. And it means that any criticism of Israel is by definition bad, and any praise of Israel is by definition virtuous, because the only truly good thing is Israel. And we know that by the actual definition, and there is one, of anti-Semitism. So what is anti-Semitism? And if you've been called it, or if someone's ever implied it, you have a problem with the Jews. You're kind of obsessed with the Jews. Say people who are completely obsessed with the Jews. You probably wonder, like, what are they accusing me of? Well, here it is. This is the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. IHRA, you may hear this. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Do you know what it is? It's on their website. It's worth looking at. Spent the morning reading it. Fascinating. So here's the actual definition of anti-Semitism. And by the way, this is a now globally recognized definition enshrined in law around the world in more than 40 countries. This is the definition, and I'm quoting. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Huh? So anti-Semitism is a perception, it's a feeling. Okay. I thought you had to have any feeling or perception you wanted. You could look at facts and come to any conclusion you wanted. No. Certain perceptions are inherently immoral, they're, quote, anti-Semitic, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Oh, so you don't have to hate the Jews to be anti-Semitic? No. Well, that answers the question for those of us who don't hate Jews at all. How can you be anti-Semitic if you don't hate Jews? Well, you can be, according to the official definition of it. Continuing the quote, rhetorical, meaning talking, words, speech, formerly protected no longer, rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Wait a second. So anti-Semitism is not necessarily hatred of Jews, and it can be expressed toward non-Jews. So you don't have to hate Jews, and you don't have to express or have these perceptions, these feelings toward Jews, so you can be non-Jews too. What is this? Well, the people who wrote it at the IHRA probably anticipated this would be confusing to you. So they gave 11 examples of what anti-Semitism is, just so you know. Like, how do I know if I'm being anti-Semitic? Well, here are 11 examples. Of those 11 examples, and we did the math, 2/3 are criticism of Israel, the state of Israel, the nation, with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi. Criticism of Israel in 2/3 of the examples that the IHRA gave, that's anti-Semitism, including, here we go, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Oh. In other words, if you think what's happening in Gaza is genocide, well, Nazis committed genocide. Now the state of Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, meaning they're trying to eliminate people on the basis of their blood. You're an anti-Semite. Oh, okay. You're an anti-Semite if you think that. It also tells us that the suggestion that Jews killed Jesus is, quote, classic anti-Semitism. Classic anti-Semitism. So there goes the New Testament. The whole New Testament is anti-Semitic too. Read the Gospels and see if they fall under that definition. They do. Why does this matter? Well, because about 40 U.S. states and the District of Columbia and our biggest cities, Miami, Los Angeles, have adopted this. This is their standard that they voted on and adopted. It's in the law. This standard. The one that tells you that criticism of the secular state of Israel or portions of the New Testament are, quote, anti-Semitism. The government of almost 40 states in the United States, I think 39 states, 40 countries around the world, but not just countries, NGOs, sports teams, the British Soccer League, Chelsea United, all of them have adopted this standard. Now, why would a sports team adopt this standard? Well, who knows why? Think about it for a minute. Why? Why would you declare something illegal? Oh, because you want to punish people who violate it. That's why. This happened today. Ukraine, that beacon of democracy and freedom that we've sent hundreds of billions of dollars to, just made it law today that anti-Semitism, in other words, criticism of Israel, is a felony punishable by up to 8 years in prison. 8 years in prison. How could a rational person understand that? Well, a rational person could not understand that. Why would a citizen of one country be sent to prison for criticizing the leadership of another country, a country not his own? Why would a citizen of one country be sent to prison for having opinions about historical events that he did not participate in and that were almost a century ago? Does that make any sense? No, except in religious terms. Those are blasphemy laws, same as the old blasphemy laws. And for all the talk of how the mullahs are bad, the mullahs are bad. Well, the mullahs probably are bad. I'm not defending the mullahs, but why are we told the mullahs are bad? The mullahs are bad because they're religious extremists. They have blasphemy laws. They'll hurt you if you say certain things. Okay. Well, that looks a lot like what we're seeing here. Almost 40 states. Now, it's interesting. The president has been, all of a sudden, it makes sense. This may be the Rosetta Stone that helps us interpret events we're watching now that are very confusing. And those would include the president advocating for re-upping FISA. Now, FISA, without getting too boring about it, is the law which has to be voted on periodically by Congress that allows the U.S. government to spy on Americans. To spy on them. Now, the whole point of it is supposed to be to spy on foreigners who are threatening us, but the nature of the technology being what it is, there are cases where we pick up communications from Americans, and in order to make that legal, we need this thing called FISA. Now, what's interesting is that the president himself was a victim of the misuse of these laws in his first term. They were used against him in what became a kind of bureaucratic attempted coup against him that we call Russiagate. And so the president was personally very sensitive on this question. He'd been a victim of the misuse of these laws. And so he said many times, I'm not for that. I don't think Americans should be spied on by their own government. I don't think you pay your taxes, today's tax day, by the way, in order to be spied on by your government when you've done nothing wrong. But we are. Everyone knows that. And this allows it to be legal. All of a sudden, the president is advocating for this new law. He wants the Congress to allow the U.S. government to spy on Americans. Why could that possibly be? Well, there are a couple of clues. One comes from the documents unearthed and made public, God bless him, by Ed Snowden some years ago that showed that NSA, the National Security Agency, the largest of all of our spy agencies, turned over raw data to, can you guess, of the Israeli government that included private information about Americans. So they sweep up all this information, the communications of American citizens, and they just turn it all over without taking private information about Americans, our citizens. They turn it over to a foreign government and its intel service to be used God knows how. That's one. Two is a very revealing moment in the Congress 2.5 years ago with a congressman from Ohio called Mike Turner, who at the time was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And he was arguing, as chairman of the House Intel Committee always do, for more spying on Americans. So the House and Senate Intel Committees was to provide oversight of the intelligence agencies, because you don't really know what they're doing, you don't know what their budget is, the whole thing is secret, you can't know, so your representatives on these committees oversee just to make sure that they're not violating the U.S. Constitution or your human rights given to you by God and protected by the U.S. government. That's the whole point. But for my lifetime, those committees have worked in concert with the intel agencies to violate the civil rights of Americans, and they've almost always been run by some of the most dishonest and personally screwed up people in the entire Congress. So maybe it's not always true, but certainly in the case of Mike Turner, it is true. You know, the guy publicly accused of corruption with a chaotic personal life, that guy winds up as the chairman of an intel committee. I wonder why. Someone who's vulnerable to control winds up in charge of oversight of the intel agencies. Okay, that's definitely Mike Turner. So anyway, Mike Turner's running this, and he's making the case to about 200 staffers on the Hill. And he said, we got to do this. And he has a bunch of slides behind him. And one of the slides he puts up shows people protesting the murder of civilians by the Israeli government in Gaza. Those Gaza protests. And he says, we need this because these people are clearly taking orders from Hamas. These are like college kids who were mad about babies being murdered by the IDF. But because Mike Turner, and a lot of people like Mike Turner, because look at them and say, you've got foreign connections. You can't have come to this conclusion on your own. You didn't just choose apostasy. You clearly were corrupted by some outside force, some foreign power. We get to spy on you. He made that case in the Congress. So how does this connect to blasphemy laws as outlined and adopted by almost 40 states by IHRA? Really simple. If having these, quote, perceptions is a crime, then that gives the U.S. government pretext to spy on you and then punish you. Another way of thinking about it is almost no human action or now perception, thought crime, is ever encoded by any legislative body without an eye toward punishing people who violate it. Why would you vote on it if you didn't intend to punish people who go against the standard you set? Well, you wouldn't. And so the point is, this new civic religion is very much the opposite of the old civic religion in that it doesn't protect civil rights, human inherent rights. It is the enemy of those rights. It is the enemy of universalism, the belief that all of us were created by God and have equal moral worth. It is the enemy of that. And it's the enemy of the understanding of people that led to the Bill of Rights, which is we have these rights given to us by God. It does not believe that, and you know that, because its first command is that you shut up, and not just shut up, but change your, quote, perceptions, change the thoughts in your head, change your feelings, your perceptions, your conclusions. You must change those. It is a totalitarian worldview. It is a totalitarian worldview in that it seeks to control the totality of a person, not just your actions. You can't punch someone in the face because you don't like his ethnicity. Fair. Everyone's for upholding that law. You can't have a certain perception of another person. If there's a better definition of a totalitarian aim, hard to think of what it might be. So that's our new religion. That's where Israelism gets us. I want to end with probably the most mocked and yet clearest evangelist of this new faith, this Israelism. You could say it's Christianity without the New Testament. And that would be someone, again, who's often made fun of for being dumb or he doesn't know what he's talking about. But it's sometimes people like that that give you the clearest picture of what the people in power really are talking about. And that person would be Sean Hannity over at Fox News. Not a bad guy, not a mean guy, lifelong Catholic. If you asked him, are you a Catholic? Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a Catholic, and he is. He's not an attacker, even claiming to understand his personal religious faith. But watch Sean Hannity, cradle Catholic, describe the Pope. This is his reaction to the President of the United States attacking the Pope, head of the Catholic Church. And here's Sean Hannity's response as a Catholic to that. Watch.
He doesn't want any conflict anywhere, and he was talking about violence. And I'm like, have you even read the Bible? Have you read the conflicts, the wars that the Israeli people they were empowered by God to defeat their enemies? Did you ever hear the story about David slaying Goliath through the power of God with a slingshot against this massive giant? Or the conflicts and the wars of King Saul and so on and so forth. And frankly, all throughout Israel's history, they've been, surrounded by enemies, but as God's chosen people, they against all odds keep winning. Pretty amazing.
So it does take a kind of cable news mentality to say of the Pope, hey, you ever read the Bible? It's hilarious. Hey, the thing about the Pope is, I never read the Bible. He's just the Pope. So there's that. Okay, it's funny. But listen to the content, which is actually more interesting and less funny and a little meatier than it seems at first. So the Pope is saying, look, I'm a Christian leader. The Christian gospel, which I represent, however imperfectly this Pope may represent it, from my perspective, imperfectly, but whatever. All Christian leaders have a duty to consult the gospel as they think about their positions on things. That's the whole point, is the gospel. And as a Christian leader, the leader of the biggest Christian denomination, I'm not for war. And maybe some wars are possibly defensible under just war theory, which no one ever really explains. But you can imagine a war of self-defense that most Christians would feel comfortable with. Being a Christian probably doesn't necessarily mean you oppose all violence in all circumstances. Maybe it should, but in practice it doesn't. But this Pope is just saying something pretty conventional like that. Nothing crazy, actually. No name-calling. No great departure from Christian theology or ethics as people have understood for thousands of years. And the response is, hey, you ever read the Bible? There's a ton of killing in the Bible. Israel's constantly under attack by its neighbors, the Amalekites, the Philistines, you name it. And they fight back with God's blessing, and they kill. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. Which is true, by the way. It is all in there. But it's not in the New Testament. And for Christians, that's the difference. It's not a matter of the Old Testament being irrelevant. It's really not. And Christians understand it as one long story. And as Jesus famously said, I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it, to bring it to its intended conclusion. I'm here so that the law will have its desired effect on you. But Jesus never offers a single order to kill or hurt anybody. And there's no place in the entire New Testament, the four Gospels, the letters that follow, mostly from Paul, and the vision at the end by St. John called Revelation, there's not one page or sentence in the entire New Testament in which Jesus is recorded saying, they're very annoying, or they're a threat, or they disagree with us, or they're of another faith, kill them. Not once. In fact, it's the opposite of that. In fact, it's so clearly the opposite of that, that you have to wonder who's reading the Bible and who isn't. In Jesus' very first sermon, in the very first gospel, Matthew 5, the famous Sermon on the Mount, he addresses this really clearly. And I think anybody reading it for the first or 100th time comes away thinking, well, a lot of things, but among them would be Jesus is really down on violence, and he's really down on greed. Very much opposed to both, because he says it really, really clearly. And not just down on violence and greed, but taking the prescriptions against those things in the Old Testament and accelerating them to a point that shocking, really, to modern ears, to ancient ears, to any human being. The demands that Jesus makes on people are shocking. He says, for example, all in Matthew 5 worth reading, amazing, really, radical, not really of this world at all, which is kind of the whole point. He says, you've been told not to kill, don't commit murder. Moses told you that. I'm telling you, don't be angry. If you curse somebody, you risk going to hell. That's what he says. So you can debate what that means. Is it possible to apply that standard? Can you actually live up to that? Pretty hard. But what you can't conclude is that Jesus is in favor of dropping bombs on kids, blowing up entire apartment buildings, raping people in prisons. You can't conclude that because it's the opposite of that. And so if you have concluded that by reference to Old Testament texts, the book of Ruth, you're espousing the tenets of religion, but it's not Christianity. It's our new religion, Israelism. That's just what it is. Call it that. Call it that. Just be honest about what you're saying. Outline it for us. Give us the creed. Think of a new name for it. Give us 10 points. We can all recite them. People who don't can be punished. But tell us what the religion is. Be straightforward with us. Stop laying this head trip on us and telling us that something that's clearly anti-Christian is in fact the real Christianity, because that's just not true. And this kind of deception is making everybody crazy.
Okay, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's a very important video. And I didn't write anything down about what I wanted to add to finish up other than as a person who grew up in America and was taught American values and was taught separation of church and state and always was happy with that, I can't approve of this sneaking religiosity being forced on us that Tucker so aptly has referred to it as Israelism. And it's becoming something you can't criticize. It's becoming something that upstanding people in the communities, if they dare criticize it, they're attacked nonstop by those that profess it, mostly Jews. And Tucker is one. I'm not important enough to be one. Candace Owens and Dave Smith, and there's one more that is part of the Big Four, Tucker, and the other one, I can't think of his name. But the important thing is we need to recognize this and start calling it out in debates in X and start demanding debates with the Zionists over this. And I guess I wanted to point out what I said in a tweet last night, that I sort of think that we might be able to start looking at Tucker Carlson and comparing him to Patrick Henry, who said the right thing at the right time in just a few words, spelled out what we can't accept. We can't accept people in foreign lands under the guise of religion ordering us around to do things for them and to give money to them. We are America first, and we need to join hands. There are people on the left and right that can join hands over this. This is the biggest issue of our time. We need to come together and make a party. There's a term called the Uniparty. That's referring to both Democrats and Republicans, because over all of their back and forth, there's an umbrella that includes them both, that will not include the America First Party. And if we can establish ourselves as a party, we can, for the first time in a very long time, give America a real choice in the next presidential election. And I hope you'll maybe, if you like this video, you can come to my Twitter and check out my posts. And maybe the occasional video that I'll post on my timeline. Y'all take care.